the power of inclusion. Unfortunately, it's not the power of making money, because we can look at the sales chart and we can notice that the power of inclusion is the power of virtue signaling and getting people in power that have no place belonging in power. Incompetent people, corrupt people, cronyism, nepotism, people that say, oh yeah, I'm going to go into position of power and fix something that wasn't a problem, and even though they don't fix it, they still manage to be in power. I mean, again, Blizzard Entertainment, they put the HR lady in charge of their storytelling. Does the HR lady know anything about storytelling? Has she worked on a previous game before? Has she wrote a book? No. But now she's in charge of storytelling. Is Blizzard going to make better stories? Probably not. Is she going to get punished if they don't make better stories? Probably not. So this is why go woke, go broke is the thing. It's not that wokeness can make interesting stories, because at the end of the day, anything can make an interesting story. But the people who are put in charge of making these stories have no experience in storytelling whatsoever, nor do they care. There is no quality control. In fact, these people are at war with the concept of quality control, and this is why you constantly get bad products. So let's talk about the power of inclusion. Unlike a novel or a movie, role-play games like Dungeons & Dragons invite the player to become part of the game itself, adding their own imagination, interpretations, and innovations so that the game feels more like a campfire storytelling session than a Monopoly board. It is also a personal kind of entertainment. That alter ego you play always reflects you to some degree. This is why representation matters. Buzzword, buzzword, buzzword. I really hate this concept, like the idea that you can't transcend who you are even with your own imagination. Like you're constantly hounded by your identity. This is what happens if you actually read some of the bullshit that they make at academia. They actually say that in order to understand the human experience, you can't understand it as a whole. Every person has their own identity, which is fixed at birth. In other words, every person is placed in a box. And the identity of a black man is completely different to the identity of a white woman. And the only way you can understand the identity of another person is if the other person gives you a story. So the storytelling of a white woman about the experiences of being a white woman is the only way you can understand the identity of a white woman. You can't use statistics, you can't use any objective matter of understanding. It is pretty much set by the academia that they understand the human experience and they decide what an identity is. If you're a person of color, you're being oppressed, and there is no objective reality that can debunk that. And in order for people of color to stop being oppressed, then you need to put people like this chucklehead in positions of power at companies, or to be the liaison of expressing how the company should be ran. And the focus is not on the product anymore, the focus is on the message. Right? So it's kind of interesting that they created a problem that only they have the solution, and the solution is to put them in power. And there is no objective way to measure whether what they're doing is good or not. For example, there's no way to measure whether in the last 4 years Dungeons & Dragons have become more inclusive, if more people of color are playing. Like, they don't care. You're never going to have any study that backs this up or anything like that. And if they can prove that, let's say, Dungeons & Dragons is less racist now than it used to be 2 years ago, they will still want to be in power. Like, they will never give away this power. And that's all it's all about. It's just putting people in positions of power. And it's usually white people, by the way. Like, let's not beat around the bush. It's white liberals that want to be in positions of power in order to save minorities for being oppressed at the gaming table. So, moving back to the article, he says that this is why representation matters. If the game only presumes a certain kind of person saving the day, it sends a terrible message to any player who don't fit that model. Who can imagine elves, magic, and dragons, but we can't imagine you as a hero. This is a very interesting interpretation of Dungeons & Dragons, which is top-down. So, Dungeons & Dragons is a game that's played at the table with your friends. And it's up to the game master to create whatever story he wants. And if the people like that story, they will play it. If not, well, the game master will not have a party to express his story through. It is a very grassroots game. But these people ignore that this is a grassroots game, and they say, no, it needs to come top down from the corporation so that they get the positions of power in those corporations and they get the fat paycheck while doing absolutely nothing to improve the game. There is no concept that there is a correct hero in Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, you can just find whomever you want as a game master and they will create whatever story they want. This never happened. So he goes forward and, like clockwork, games and their players were not always welcoming of women, BIPOC. Who uses the word BIPOC, by the way, huh? Have you ever spoken in a conversation and someone called some other person BIPOC? I mean, if I were to call my black friend BIPOC, I think I would get slapped. I think he would not be able to contain his frustration. Normal human beings do not talk this way. It sounds like a fucking Pokemon. Stop using the word BIPOC. Just use non-white, because that's what it means, right? Like non-white people is what you're trying to say. Is there any... Okay, look. Is there any other group of people besides white who aren't white or BIPOC? Because if not, then just say non-white. Like, why are you hiding around the bush? Why are you afraid of saying it? And secondly, I never thought that Dungeons & Dragons was unwelcoming to non-white people. Women didn't want to play it when I was a kid. They considered this to be very immature. They would say, like, when are you going to grow up? What is this childhood nonsense? And they would go out and date the jock that played football and liked cars. Nowadays, there are some women that play Dungeons and Dragons. Still not a lot of them. And it's not because men are trying to keep them away. It's just that, I know it's astonishing, but maybe they're not interested in the game. As for people of color, I'm pretty sure it's very popular in Japan. It's probably popular in India. I mean, you exclude those people, right? You're so inclusive, but you're going to exclude what other countries do. Do you think there's a lot of white people in China when the Chinese play Dungeons and Dragons? Now, depending on the country, I guess, like, if you're in an impoverished nation, maybe you do not have the money to buy Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, here in Romania, it's a very expensive product. So I guess you don't care that the company is not very inclusive and they don't want to lower the price so more people can play. But it is what it is. You know, it's, at the end of the day, this is not about getting more people to play. It's about getting smiley, liberal, white people in positions of power. So the publisher says that why not write a greater sense of inclusivity in games themselves? Why not show heroes who are black, LGBTQ, in a wheelchair, to show that imagination has no barriers? I'm sorry, but X-Men did the wheelchair first. I mean, Charles Xavier used to be a very powerful character. And by the way, he is made in such a way that the wheelchair isn't what defines him. Like, when you think about Charles Xavier, you're not like, oh my god, well, he's the man in the wheelchair. No, it's the fact that he's in the wheelchair is just an aspect of his character. But whatever a progressive, when a woke ideologue creates a character, they would make, like, the wheelchair to be the defining feature of that character. And once they have the representation, the guy in a wheelchair is never going to be the villain. He's never going to be the drunk husband, because it's representation, right? So if he were to be the villain or the drunk husband, then it would send the message that the writer thinks that all people in wheelchair are the drunk, blah, blah, blah. This is why representation is bullshit. What people want, they don't want representation. They want relatability. You want to relate with the character. With Charles Xavier, you can relate because he is the professor that cares about you. All of us had a professor in our high school that cared about us, and we think of them fondly. So it's relatability that's important. It's not representation. A guy in a wheelchair cannot represent the entire community of people in wheelchairs, regardless of how well he is written. When the latest edition of Dungeons & Dragons released a few years ago, the game was much more progressive and inclusive than previous editions. It embraced gender fluidity. Okay, we're talking about a magical universe where people can just change gender at whim. I mean, the polymorph spell exists. You are pushing your ideology into this as hard as you can, even if it makes no sense. Absolutely no sense whatsoever. It acknowledged neurodivergence. In other words, crazy people. And it vastly widened the representation of women, BIPOC, and disabled adventurers in text and artwork. No one cares. Literally no one cares. Like, you can play your game any way you want to. Do you know what people care about? Making sure that the game doesn't have exploits, making sure that the game has a bigger variety of spells and feats, and allows people to use the creativity in order to build interesting characters. And all the focus has been moved away from that. Like, literally all the focus now is on ideological horseshit to justify why these people should get a fat paycheck as they get into positions of power. It's absolutely disgusting. I'm gonna go watch anime.